right, so during our silent prayer there, I found myself praying, all right, open up the skies and just pour rain, right? I'm really curious to see what that would sound like in here. I think I've only been in the sanctuary like one time when it really poured down rain, but it was like midweek, and so we weren't in worship. I thought that'd be so cool if it poured rain while we were in worship. That'd be really neat. Anyway, maybe it's yet to come. We'll see. So this morning, I'm going to start with a little joke for you. You ready? Wow, you guys are asleep. You ready? Woo! Okay. All right. So it starts with the pearly gates. So a man dies, and he gets up to the pearly gates, and he sees St. Peter standing there, and he's like, "Wow! Whew, thank goodness I made it. I'm just so glad to be here." And he starts to walk through the pearly gates, and St. Peter says, "Wait, hold on. Like you gotta tell me some stuff before you just get to come in here. Like I need to hear why you get to come in." And the guy's like, "Oh, okay." St. Peter says, "Now you know it takes 100 points to get in." He's like, all right. So tell me some things that you think would be worth points to get in." The guy says, "Well, let's see. I went to church, more often than I didn't go to church." So St. Peter says, "That's pretty good. 1 point." All right. Well, okay, can you do any better? Yeah, well, I did always tithe to my church. That's pretty good. 2 points. 2 points. 2 points? It's like, you got to give me something else. So the man says, "Well, I was married to the same woman for 53 years, and I was always faithful." And St. Peter says, "Yeah, that's pretty good. Point." So the guy looks at him, he's like, "This is going to be really rough. I mean, it's really only by the grace of God that I'm ever going to get in here." And St. Peter says, 100 points. It really is only by the grace of God that we will ever get to live with God in eternity, right? Okay, so today we continue our series that is based on this book called Surprised by Hope, and it's written by a theologian called N.T. Wright. And N.T. Wright is kind of a big deal. Has anybody ever heard of him before? I will enlighten you if you've never heard of him before. Okay, so he's like a modern, current, he's alive, theologian. Well, it's kind of important to say with theologians, right? There's been a lot of them. Not a lot of them are still alive. So he is the former Bishop of Durham, so in England, right? But he now serves as the chair of New Testament and Early Christianity at the School of Divinity at the University of St. Andrews. Now, like I said, he's kind of a big deal, so he's written all these best-selling books, and he's been featured on things like ABC News, Dateline, Colbert Report, yeah, there's his picture, Fresh Air, all that stuff. But guys, I feel like anytime we have a Brit that we are like listening to or whatever, we really have to hear them talk, right? Okay, so let's hear him talk.
Some people, when they look up at those clouds, they have been taught to think, maybe that's what heaven's like. I often get asked, isn't it a bit odd that Christians banging on about the resurrection of Jesus? What's that got to do with real life? It's not up to us to build the kingdom of God. That's what God does. It's up to us to do the particular things that we're called to do, the things that right now give hope to the world. Surely we can have a perfectly good Christian moral standard or even a spirituality without having to say that once upon a time Jesus rose again from the dead. And people often hook that up with other big questions. Just what do we believe about heaven? Just what does the word resurrection itself actually mean? And what is the real Christian hope, both for us and for the world? Those are some of the big issues we'll be looking at, and I think you'll find that when you get a clearer view of what resurrection itself means, it puts everything else in a new light and helps you to make connections, but also much more to become people of hope in and for the world. That and other things like that is what this course is going to be all about, and I hope you'll really enjoy it.
Isn't that lovely? You can't miss out on that. He's walking through these big green areas and sitting fireside. It just doesn't get more cliche than that, right? So he actually takes his book and splits it up into like a 6-session study. And I did look it up on YouTube. If you want to do more with it, you can find those sessions on YouTube and kind of read along without necessarily having to read the whole book. So that's kind of cool. He takes, as he's talking about building the kingdom of God, he takes a really big focus on this one verse, and it's the last verse that was read this morning. But this one on the screen is in a little different version. I don't know if you can see it, so I'll read it to you. It says, "Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm." Hang on to those words, stand firm. "Let nothing move you. Fully give yourselves to the work of the Lord, because you know your labor is not in vain." Right? You know your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Now, this verse is really interesting because it is the last verse in the book of 1 Corinthians, the entire book. So you know that statistic that everybody remembers the first thing and the last thing, and they don't necessarily remember the middle, which means actually this part right now you're not probable to remember. Yeah, okay. No, this is where you say, "No, Pastor Sarah, we remember everything you ever say." You didn't say yes to that one. Okay. Well, apparently it is like a time-honored tradition. It's been true throughout history, is that the first and the last is the most memorable. So in 1 Corinthians, the best is saved to last. So this last verse is like the most important thing that is trying to be conveyed in the whole book. So the idea that if you stand firm in God, that nothing you do will be in vain. Okay. So I started to think about that stand firm part. That sounds a little too easy, doesn't it? If I can just stand firm and just stay right here, I'm going to say, okay, this is where God is. If God is like right here in a box on the floor, I'm just going to stand firm right here. Good to go, right? Do you think that's actually going to work out? You think that's going to work in life? You've lived life. You know how this goes, right? That's not how life goes. Life changes. Life moves, right? And I also started to think about the world as it's created. I mean, God created the whole world. And so also God created this pattern of, death and life and transformation and all this stuff. I mean, the world also has things in it like earthquakes, floods. These are things that shake even the firmest of foundations. So if we can stand firm, I think that God may still move our foundation even while we're still standing on it. In the context of life, think of it this way. Have you ever had a job that you thought you'd have forever? Have you ever had a friend that you thought you'd have forever? Have you ever moved into a house that you thought you'd live in forever? Have you ever heard that the only constant in life is change? So in the commentary I was reading about this verse in particular, it breaks it down into 3 parts and talks about this idea of standing firm in the Lord. So the first part is that stand firm thing, and in some versions it says be immovable, like be unable to move. And that idea is just that no matter what comes, what winds may blow, what life things may change, that what Christ is doing will continue to be done. But if that were there alone, if the verse didn't continue, wouldn't it sound like to be steadfast or to be immovable or to stand firm is to hold on tight and just stand still? Isn't that what it would sound like if it was just that one part? Okay, well then it continues on. And the second part is abounding always in the work of the Lord. Or this version says, fully give yourselves to the work of the Lord. Right? And that just means that, well, if you're grounded in Christ, then it will constantly feel abundant. So you couldn't possibly always be in the same place. Doesn't that get boring? If you're just looking out at the world and it always looks the same and nothing ever changes. Okay, so that adds another layer of depth. So you move on to the third part, that their labor is not in vain in the Lord. This one says, because you know your labor is not in vain, right? So that makes the first 2 parts true. Because when you are grounded in Christ, then everything that you're doing is where Christ will lead you. It's where God will take you, right? And not down your own path, which then may sort of fall apart and wouldn't be the firmest foundation. Okay, so see what we just did there is we did something called reject the premise. So the premise of this verse would be like, nope, the Bible says I need to stand firm, and that's that, we're done, right? We rejected the premise that it's just that and found a whole mess of stuff underneath it. This is actually a technique I think they teach like in law school. If you did like high school debate team or something, reject the premise. It's a legitimate arguing technique. Politicians use it all the time. Now you're going to watch for it, aren't you? So here's an example. This is just a fun example. Chocolate versus vanilla ice cream. Who loves chocolate ice cream? You're good people. Yes. Who loves vanilla ice cream? You all are crazy. Now, I can say that, but did I change your mind, vanilla people? Did I change your mind at all? No, not even a little bit. Then people at the first service, they started to like defend the vanilla choice. Well, you can do more with it. You can put more stuff on it. And then the chocolate people, no, you can't. Anyway, and back and forth it goes, right? We didn't resolve anything. Now, to reject the premise of that argument would be to reject that one is better than the other and to go after it more of, actually, the best part of this whole dilemma is that we have the choice, right? And all of a sudden we found common ground. Reject the premise. So here's a more real life example. In the like cell phone wars, so Google touted, you know what I'm talking about, right? Droid versus Apple. Okay. Google touted that its Android operating system is open. And they said that the Apple system was closed. You can see how that is, right? Because Google tends to like work with other platforms and stuff. And Apple is like, no, you're going to use Apple stuff, right? You see what I'm saying? Okay, so this was years ago, and Steve Jobs instead categorized the Android system as fragmented. So because they were so sharey with everybody that it actually broke them up, that's what he said. And he said Apple prefers an integrated approach, right? So he rejected the premise of the open-close debate and said, no, I'm going to reframe it in more favorable terms. So rejecting the premise actually does two things, and one is less useful than the other. The first is you can knock your opponent off their feet. That's not really great, because now you don't even have an opponent. Now you're not even talking anymore. The second thing that it does, and which is more helpful, is that it reshapes the scope of the argument. And N.T. Wright does this with the most common view of how a new heaven and a new earth will be restored, will come about. So he does this with the words sort of new and old. So I like this picture, new and old. Although that's kind of the old being made new, right? So, all right, when I say the words new and old, what do you think? We're going to take new first. When I say new, what do you think? New clothes. That's a good one. I like that. What else do you think? New. Fresh. Good. Better? Fancy. Oh, I like that. Anything else? Modern. That's a good one. Somebody at the last service said clean. Yeah. Okay, what about old? If I say old, what do you think? Classic. Oh. Classic. That's the first one. What else? Reliable. Oh, wow. You guys are going a different direction. Old means old. What else does it mean? Does it mean sort of tired? Used, antiquated sometimes. Okay. It can mean both sides of it. Yeah. So what happens usually, not always, but what happens usually to the old when you get something new? Yeah. He's like, yes, that's definitely what you do. You throw it away. Okay, so what if we were to reject the premise that the old had to go away when the new comes? That's what N.T. Wright does in his book. So I was going to read you a little piece of it. He says, when you're working towards the resurrection and you're working towards the hope of God, you're not restoring a great painting that is shortly going to be thrown on a fire. You're not planting roses in a garden that's about to be dug up for a building site. You are, strange though it may seem, almost as hard to believe as the resurrection itself, accomplishing something that will become, in due part of God's new world. Every act of love, gratitude, kindness, all of this will find its way through the resurrecting power of God into the new creation that God will one day make. That's the logic of the mission of God. So the first time I ever read that was years ago when I was in seminary. This was like assigned reading in seminary. And that was a new thought. I just thought, yeah, the earth will be made new, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be an apocalypse, right? Not everything has to be destroyed in order for the new to come. That's rejecting the premise. In fact, he's backed up by theologians from generations and centuries before. Martin Luther, one of his favorite quotes, or famous quotes now, is, "Even if I knew that tomorrow the world would go to pieces, I would still plant my apple tree." Even if we knew that Christ was going to come back tomorrow, we should still go out and plant a tree. Because if that tree was already planted, can you imagine what Christ could do with that? What could grow from what is already planted? So the grace of God is old, but it's what makes us new too. So how does this old and new work together? I am a big fan of Ken Follett's books, the newer trilogy series. Has anybody read Ken Follett? He's kind of old and new. So he's got like two different types of books that he's written. He used to write kind of like thrillers and mysteries and stuff. And like murder mysteries, right? I haven't read those. But this one he wrote a long time ago. He wrote the first of this trilogy series in 1989, and then wrote all those thrillers, and then came back to the trilogy, finished it off, and then wrote another trilogy. So now he's like a totally different kind of a writer. Well, this book takes place in the 12th century. So he did all kinds of research about what life was like in the 12th century and ended up writing a book that spans like 40 years. So it's a really long book. And it centers around several characters, one of which is a stone cutter, a stone mason, who is working on building a cathedral. And it's just fascinating. All you learn about like how they built cathedrals. And the main character, I'll try not to ruin the ending for you in case you want to go read it, but his life dream, his life goal is to be the head architect on his very own cathedral. And so as he goes and he works on like this cathedral, that cathedral, he's kind of got this like blueprint working up in his head, and he's perfecting it with everything that he encounters and he learns on the job along the way. But in order for him to someday be an architect, he's going to have to work his way up. So just before he would become an architect, he would be a head mason. And there's usually like one, maybe two of those on an entire cathedral. And the head mason is the person who's like on site. I'm thinking contractor, right? So that's the one that's coordinating all the different areas and things coming and going, and just big job, right? But not little tiny details. Then just below that is all the masons. Whole bunch of those. Those are the middle managers, right? They're conveying the messages from the head mason. They're making sure that their specific team is getting their job done. So underneath the masons are all the stone cutters. Hundreds and hundreds of stone cutters. And they might specialize in anything. They might specialize in making gargoyles or any other decorative elements, right? They might even specialize in archways. You've seen those big archways in cathedrals, or pictures of them at least. I just can't even imagine like taking a big stone, right? And then fashioning it in such a way that it's going to fit perfectly with the stone next to it and not collapse. It's going to hold up the weight of an entire cathedral. So there are stone cutters who specialize in that weight-bearing, area and figuring all that out. And then there's the stone cutters who get forgotten. They work out in the quarry. They're actually cutting the stone out of the earth and transporting it to the work site. The crazy thing is that most of the people who are working on the cathedral just have to trust that everybody else is going about doing their job and they're working hard, right? They don't know what the masons are saying to each other. They don't talk to the people on the other side of the work site very often. And actually, a lot of them are never even going to see the entire project be completed. So a cathedral takes a minimum of like 30 years to build. Well, average life expectancy in the 12th century was like 45 years old. So even if you started like as soon as you were trained and you were ready, if you timed it just right with when the cathedral started being built to the end of it, you might be able to see it from start to finish. But that's so rare, so rare. Even you could die on the work site. It's extremely dangerous. There's no OSHA. There's no workman's comp. And who knows what might happen, right? So most people would assume, and when they're working on a cathedral, that only their children or even their grandchildren will ever be able to see the whole picture. Can you imagine that? That's hard to wrap your mind around because we think so differently today, and we live so differently today. I mean, today you could retire from some professions after only 20 years, right? And, if it took 40 years to build a cathedral, well, 40 years is like just shy of half the lifespan that we might expect to live if we lived a long, full life at this point. Even living through early childhood is more of a given these days than something that would be expected. Did you know that people in the 12th century often wouldn't name their children until they were like 3, 5 years old because the probability that they might die was so high? That's hard to wrap your mind around. There are so many things that we experience in this time, in this age. It's no wonder that we tend to assume that new is better and that it makes old obsolete. We tend to think that it all has to be accomplished like right now, and we have to do it all. So I'm wondering, can we go back to the scripture verse, the slide that had the whole verse on there, if you can find it? Because if you look back in the Greek of this verse, so the original language it was written in, that phrase where it says the work of the Lord, so fully give yourselves to the work of the Lord. Work is in the singular form, meaning your work and your work and your work and all of our work, it's all one in the Lord. And then in the same way, but the opposite, because you know your labor is not in vain, your is plural. Your work is not in vain when it's one labor in the Lord. Building for the kingdom means that all of our work in the Lord is not only necessary, but it's also eternally significant. Eternally significant. So stand firm, reject the premise, and be surprised by hope. Because now you know the secret answer. You already have 100 points. Yeah. We'll continue our time of worship to the giving of our tithes and our offerings.